Chapter 1476 Extra, Dang Shintong 16. Dang Shintong fell into the sprite's mouths once again, and this time he brought Amber along with him. Amber gritted her teeth. He's a madman who can't be measured by common sense. Perhaps to the sprites, melting into one was also a way to show love for someone. Dang Shintong laughed, but I don't want to die just yet. But you don't look like you can beat him. Amber said very honestly. She cringed. Maybe we're all going to die. Are you scared of dying? Afraid? I was afraid, but then I wasn't. Now, though, I'm a little scared again. People are always so complicated, especially a woman like me. Isn't it? But I won't die, much less let you die. Dang Shintong said in an incomparably firm tone. In the future, I will definitely become a great man who will be able to cross the world. That's why I won't fall here. As soon as his words fell, the snow metro wolf in the distant region once again transformed into a long-range artillery and fired dozens of flying bullets to attack. With the speed of the high-speed missiles, it was difficult for the sprite's huge body to dodge them. What's more, at this moment, all of his strength was used on biting the Dang Shintong. The sharp pain in his back caused him to roar angrily from his throat, yet he still clenched his teeth in death. It was only this momentary loophole that had been captured by Dang Shintong. He wrapped one hand around Amber and launched an attack towards the sprite's mouth. The holy light was dazzling, the sword blade was sharp, and the silver blade formed a dense and large net, mercilessly cutting into the sprite's mouth. But the sprite that was good at protecting itself would not leave such an obvious weakness. His mouth was also filled with hard bones, and Dang Shintong's sword blades were only able to tear through the skin, but were unable to harm his fundamentals. Roar! The sprite chose to bring Dang Shintong and Amber this time, heading deeper underwater. The deepest part of this swamp was as high as hundreds of meters, and as long as they got there, with the water pressure it would cause the humans' blood vessels to burst. Even with the protection of their combat suits, Dang Shintong and Amber's movements would be greatly disturbed. Dang Shintong did not die in the slightest. His sword was still swinging, slashing at the sprite's teeth and bones. It was just a pity that the power was not enough. A hint of gloom appeared in Dang Shintong's eyes. In the middle of his mind, the words that Dang Yuanbo had once said to him surfaced. It's not that you don't have enough power. All the high technology of Teng's technology has been used on you. Even an Epsilon-level mutant might not have everything that you have ever had. What you lack now is not resources, but a belief in fighting. Go and think hard, what do you really want? And why exactly are you fighting? Until you figure this out, you will never be able to break through to the tipping point. What is it that I want, exactly? Even in this moment of life and death crisis, Dang Shintong was still confused over this matter. In his life, it seemed like there was nothing he couldn't get. A life that was too rich made him not have those worldly desires of ordinary people. He even felt that even if he died at the age of 30, he was 10,000 times more wonderful than the vast majority of people in their entire lives. And after the end of the world, his efforts were more for the brilliant glory that was sought after by millions of people. But those things, were they really what he wanted? After the short-lived glory, he would often fall into a great emptiness and loneliness. It turned out that a long time ago, he had lost the purpose of his life. And many of the things he thought were important were attached to him by others. But I don't want to die now. Dang Shintong's consciousness returned to reality, and his gaze blazed. No matter what happens in the future, it's only when you live that you can think clearly about all that mess. Dang Shintong, now is not the time to be sad. At the time of life and death, he looked at the tender young girl in his arms, and the desire to protect her began to well up. Even though he knew that it was because of her ability, the impulse within could indeed be turned into motivation. He began to aim his attack in one direction, frantically. Humph! A muffled grunt came from the sprite. My mouth is the claustrophobic cage, it is the most despairing place of death, you will never escape. As soon as the words fell, a powerful oppressive force came from all directions, and like a meat grinder, it began to squeeze Dang Shintong and Amber's bodies. Screech! Dang Shintong's ears heard the sound of combat suits twisting, and he even felt that his bones were twisting and deforming. The Amber in his arms was even paler, looking like she was about to be crushed into a puddle of flesh and blood at any moment. Dang Shintong inexplicably felt a pain in his heart. An extremely strong thought surged in the center of his mind. He absolutely would not allow this girl to die in front of him. And right at this time, Amber reached out and wrapped her arms around his waist with force, like a murmur before death, and whispered, "Don't die, live." After saying this, she made a move that made Dang Shintong completely unimaginable. She unexpectedly kissed Dang Shintong's lips in one mouthful. Dang Shintong froze in place. In the next moment, he suddenly felt a strange power surging out from among his blood. It was as if some sort of shackle had been opened within his body. Amber's ability was called in the name of love, which was the power of being loved. Being afraid of being hurt herself, she wanted everyone to love her. But love is mutual. Those who are loved can also give their love. When she does so, she can raise the power of the one she loves. Once this power was greedily hijacked by the sprite, which is why he was able to become the master of the Ice Flower Swamp territory. And now, she had bestowed this power on Dang Shintong. The natural instincts that he had accumulated for many years and had never been able to bring them into full play were aroused in this instant. The sprite swooped down deeper into the swamp with the duo, and suddenly felt a surge of vigorous power in his mouth. Dazzling white light lit up like the sun. Ka-chow! His bite was so incredibly strong that his kiss was hardened. What? How is this possible? The sprite was stunned as he felt what was happening right under his eyes, and then bit as hard as he could to crush Dang Shintong. Boom! The tremendous force directly impacted his long kiss and broke through his cage. Dang Shintong turned into a ray of white light and rushed out of the Ice Flower Swamp with Amber. No! You are not allowed to leave, she is mine. The sprite roared angrily, and the entire Ice Flower Swamp shook as the lake water interspersed with gigantic chunks of ice rushed up into the sky. 100-meter-long supersized crocodile came straight at Dang Shintong. Dang Shintong coldly looked down at the huge mouthpiece below, and in the next instant, a yellow light flashed in the air, and a giant cruise missile fell like a meteor, targeting none other than the sprite. You don't think that I was joking with you when I said I was able to summon a cruise missile, right? Chapter 1477 Extra, Dang Shintong 17. Boom! A giant cruise missile crashed down, directly covering the area where the sprite was. The impact caused by the violent explosion caused a huge crater to be blown out in the middle of the Ice Flower Swamp, and dazzling yellow flames enveloped the sprite's body. And Dang Shintong had long ago fled to the distance with Amber. Amber looked at him in surprise. Huh? This works too? Dang Shintong looked down at the fair-skinned girl and smiled slightly. Actually, my family is quite rich. By the way, this missile was made by our own family. He rubbed his fingers together, a little bit of a small family industry. Amber's eyes widened, and for a time she actually didn't know what to say. Soon, though, the roar of the sprites came from the distance. One cruise missile wasn't enough to kill him. He was a guy who hated wrapping himself in heavy armor, with a leathery, all-skeletal defense that allowed him to tough out such cruise missiles that could destroy several blocks. He rushed out from the center of the explosion, heading straight for Dang Shintong and Amber. But at this time, his condition wasn't much better. Even if he was a mutant, he was still a carbon-based creature after all, not an adamantine body. His skin was broken and his body was drenched in blood, and at this moment, he lunged over with a bloody and hideous appearance. Dang Shintong felt his newly gained power, and he took a big step forward with his sword in a striking pose. The power of holy light converged at the tip of the sword, gradually forming a silver-colored quadrangle. Converged the power of piercing into one point, causing the most powerful single attack. Now, can my power still penetrate your body? Dang Shentong whispered softly to himself, then stabbed his sword out towards the sprite. The sword went out with speed. The speed of his sword was so fast that one could only see a silver-colored holy light turn into light, instantly appearing between the two of him and the sprite. Poof! The silver quadrangle exploded on the sprite's head, and the unbreakable defense of the giant crocodile was finally pierced through this time. Amber, how dare you inflict your power on him? This is an intolerable betrayal. You belong to me. The sprite raged, and the sword, though it went through his skull, avoided the vitals because of its overwhelming size. Tom. The huge body violently leapt high into the air and crashed down towards Dang Shentong, its bloody mouth open like a huge pincer. The crocodile's kiss was its most powerful weapon. She's not your property. Dang Shentong was not afraid of the giant monster. He held his sword to dodge the giant crocodile's falling attack, then stabbed at his soft abdomen. The sprite's abdomen was penetrated and blood gushed out like a fountain. He quickly flung his tail, and the speed of this strike was so fast that Dang Shentong couldn't dodge in time. However, the tail swept across, but inexplicably, Dang Shentong disappeared the moment his tail fell. This feeling is marvelous. Both my senses, speed and strength have greatly increased now. It seems like the shackles in my body have been completely opened. Is this her ability? Dang Shentong glanced at Amber in the distance, and his heart was already enlightened. Roar! The sprite opened its huge mouth and spat out a red-colored beam of energy in his direction. This time, he missed again. The sprite finally realized something was wrong. This guy, what the hell is going on? Even with even more speed, it's impossible to easily dodge my attacks time and time again, or even make it impossible for me to detect his movements. A little confused, he carefully observed his surroundings. Finally, with his keen perception of supernatural abilities, it allowed him to discover the problem. He didn't know when, but dozens of large white mirrors had appeared in the space around him. Whenever he attacked Dang Shentong would disappear from one place and appear in another mirror location. Is this a space supernatural? The sprite growled in a deep voice, his voice filled with caution. It's not what you think. Dang Shentong smiled as he held his longsword. My ability, however, is light. The speed of light is the benchmark of this universe, the measure of all things. The longsword in his hand slowly rotated, and an even brighter four-main star coalesced at the tip of his sword. Although I can't truly turn into light, within the area of the mirror image, I can do instantaneous transportation. Speaking of this, he suddenly said with some pride. Even that guy can't do a timeless movement. As soon as the words fell, the sword light in his hand skyrocketed, stabbing at the sprite from the sky. The sprite gritted his teeth, and his huge body unexpectedly moved quickly on the ice, dodging the terrifying blow. But in the next moment, from beneath his soft body, a tetromino suddenly exploded and penetrated his chest and abdomen. Ka-body suffered a heavy blow. The sprite sprayed a large pool of blood out of his mouth. What is this? He was completely confused. Clearly he had already dodged Dang Shentong's attack right. But why was he still hit? He looked down at his body. There was a polished ice surface there, like a bright mirror. A mirror image can perfectly reflect light, including the energy it contains. Within the area of my mirror image, I don't need to aim my sword at you when I strike. Just by leaving an engraving and then controlling the trajectory, I can make an attack that encompasses the entire range. It absolutely won't stop until it hits the target, much less dodge it. The name of this move, I call it celestial etching. The sprite's huge body was truncated, and at this moment, it looked exceptionally terrifying, as this move was deadly enough. However, although Dang Shentong's attack stopped, other attacks did not. For example, the chariot, Snow Metro Wolf, continued to fire missiles from a distance to attack his body. Ah! The intense traumatic pain brought the sprite back to his human form. His entire waist was almost amputated, and no matter how much he covered it with his hands, blood still flowed out in rivulets. He stared at Deng Shintong in death, and especially when he looked at Amber, that hatred became even more obvious. He extended his palm towards Amber, like an eagle's claw to firmly control her in his palm. "Amber, you are mine. Why did you betray me? Were you not happy when you were with me? Shut up!" Amber yelled with all her might. She looked at the sprite with hatred and clenched her fists so she could finally vent all the emotions inside. "From the first day I met you, I couldn't wait to watch you die." Deng Shintong did not comment on the duo's matter. There were times when silence was the best way to honor others. He raised the sword in his hand, and a mirror of light emerged in midair, surrounding the sprite. "Sacred power of light, carve the long sky." "Judgment." The silver-colored quadruple star appeared in the pale sky. This time, it completely took away the sprite's life.